The Galactic University of Xenobiology floated in the dark space around Axis Prime, a neutral moon where thousands of different alien species came to learn and share knowledge. The building itself was enormous, made of clear crystal materials that caught the light from distant stars and turned it into rainbow patterns on the walls. Inside one of the largest lecture halls, over 200 beings from across the galaxy sat waiting for class to begin. Professor Kelvith walked to the front of the room with slow, careful steps. He was a Tharnian, which meant his body was covered in silver-blue scales that changed color depending on his mood. He had 4 eyes that could look in different directions at the same time, and when he spoke, his words came out as clicks and whistles. A small device on his chest translated everything he said into Standard Galactic, the language that all species used to talk to each other. Today was special. The lecture hall had never been this full before. Students packed every seat, and some even stood along the walls. They had come from every corner of the galaxy to hear what Professor Kelvith had to say. His subject was predator psychology, which meant he studied how hunting species thought and behaved. But today he was going to talk about something specific, something that had been on everyone's mind since humans joined the Galactic Council 53 years ago. Kelvith looked out at the crowd and let his scales settle into a calm green color. He touched a control panel, and the lights in the room dimmed slightly. The students grew quiet, waiting. "The question I get asked more than any other," Kelvith began, his translator turning his alien sounds into words everyone could understand, "is about humans. Specifically, why does the Galactic Council have special rules for human diplomats? Why do we have warning systems that go off when a human smiles? Why do so many species react with fear when they see a human showing their teeth?" In the third row, a young human named Kevin Martinez felt his stomach tighten. He was 22 years old, tall and thin, with dark hair and brown eyes. He was one of only 5 humans studying at the university, and right now he wished he was anywhere else. He could feel other students looking at him, their various eyes and sensors turning his way before quickly looking back at the professor. Next to Kevin sat his roommate, a creature called a Fleabian named Zix. Fleabians looked like large octopuses, but with purple skin and 12 tentacles instead of 8. Zix was a good friend, always kind and helpful. Right now, one of his tentacles reached over and gently touched Kevin's arm, trying to comfort him. Kevin appreciated it, even though he knew that even Zix was sometimes scared of him. Once, 3 months ago, Kevin had laughed at a joke and smiled without thinking. Zix had jumped backward so fast that he knocked over a table. After that, Kevin had learned to warn his friend before showing any teeth. Professor Kelvith activated a holographic projector in the center of the room. A 3-dimensional image appeared in the air, showing a star map with Earth highlighted in blue. "To understand the fear," the professor continued, "we must first understand what makes humans different from every other species in our galactic community. Humans are the only species we know of that evolved from persistence predators on a death world classified as Class 12 hostile." A wave of noise went through the audience. Students whispered to each other in 100 different languages. Class 12 was serious. It was the second highest danger rating that could be given to a planet. Most species evolved on Class 4 or Class 5 worlds where the weather was mild and the predators were not too dangerous. A Class 12 world was a nightmare, a place where almost everything was trying to kill you. "Many of you are thinking that being a predator species is not unusual," Kelvith said, his scales turning a darker blue. "This is true. The Kresh evolved from pack hunters. The Yentari were ambush predators. The Zorgans are still primarily carnivorous, but there is a fundamental difference between humans and all other predator species in the Council." The holographic display changed, showing the face of a human woman. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, and her face was neutral, showing no expression at all. Then the image changed and the woman was smiling. Her lips pulled back, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. Several students in the front row physically moved backward in their seats. "When a Kresh shows its teeth," Professor Kelvith explained, "it is a threat display. Clear, honest, and easy to understand. The Kresh is saying, 'I am dangerous, stay away from me.' Every species with teeth or similar weapons uses them this way. We show our weapons when we are angry or afraid or ready to fight. It is a universal constant across all known predator species." He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was completely silent now, except for humans. When a human shows their teeth, when they pull back their lips and display their weapons, they are expressing joy, happiness, satisfaction, pleasure. Kevin felt his face getting hot. He kept his expression carefully neutral, his lips pressed together, making sure not to show any teeth. He had heard all of this before, of course. Every human who traveled off Earth got the same briefing. Don't smile at aliens unless you want to scare them. Your face does things that other species find terrifying. Be careful, be aware. Don't be yourself. This creates something we call psychological dissonance, Kelvith continued. When we see a human smile, our brains receive two conflicting messages. One message says this creature is showing weapons, therefore it is dangerous. The other message says, this creature appears relaxed and happy, therefore it is not a threat. These two messages cannot both be true, and yet with humans, they are. The professor's scales shifted through several colors, finally settling on purple, which Kevin had learned meant the Tharnian was uncertain or troubled. But this alone would not be enough to create the fear that humans inspire across the galaxy. Many species have confusing social signals. What makes the human smile truly disturbing is the context in which they use it. Another holographic image appeared, this time showing a human man in military uniform. He was standing in what looked like a destroyed building, with smoke and fire visible through broken windows behind him. His uniform was torn and dirty, and there was blood on his face. And he was smiling. Not a small, polite smile, but a wide, genuine smile that showed all of his teeth. This is Captain Lewis Harper of the Human Defense Forces, Kelvith said quietly. This image was taken 30 seconds after his unit successfully defended a colony against raiders, despite being outnumbered 3-1. 5 of his soldiers died in the battle. Captain Harper himself was injured. And yet, as you can see, he is smiling. A student near the back, a Pelthian with green plant-like fronds growing from its head, raised one of its limbs to ask a question. Professor Kelvith nodded for it to speak. Professor, the Pelthian said in a high, musical voice. Surely this must be some kind of shock response. Perhaps the human was not in his right mind after the trauma of combat. Kelvith's scales turned a sad shade of gray. That is what we all hoped at first, but no. Captain Harper was examined by medical professionals immediately after this image was taken. He was completely lucid, mentally sound, and knew exactly what he was doing. When asked why he was smiling, he said, and I quote, "Because we won. Because the colonists are safe. Because my soldiers fought like heroes and I'm proud of them." The professor looked around the room, meeting the eyes of as many students as he could. Do you understand what this means? A human can watch their friends die, can be wounded themselves, can stand in the ruins of battle and still smile because they achieved their objective. They can experience grief and pain and satisfaction all at the same time, and they express the satisfaction while hiding the grief. Kevin wanted to explain that it was more complicated than that humans smiled for a lot of different reasons, that sometimes a smile was just trying to keep going when everything was terrible. But he stayed quiet. This was not his lecture, and he was trying very hard not to draw any more attention to himself than he already had. Over the next hour, Professor Kelvith said, I am going to show you documented cases of human behavior that have been studied by xenopsychologists across the galaxy. I am going to explain why the human smile has become the single most discussed topic in predator psychology, and I am going to tell you why, when a human smiles at you, you should pay very close attention to the context. The lights dimmed further, and the holographic display grew brighter. Kevin settled deeper into his seat, preparing himself for what he knew was coming. This was going to be a long lecture. Professor Kelvith pressed another button on his control panel, and the holographic display in the center of the lecture hall changed completely. The image now showed a small spacecraft floating in the darkness of space. It was clearly human-made, with the angular design and visible weapon ports that characterized early human vessels. The ship looked old and battered, with scorch marks on its hull and one of its engines flickering weakly. 53 years ago, Kelvith began, his scales turning a somber dark blue. Humanity made first contact with the Galactic Council, but it did not happen the way we usually prefer. There was no peaceful meeting, no exchange of diplomatic messages, no careful introduction of cultures. Instead, first contact happened here, near the Andromeda neutral zone, when a human merchant ship called the Wanderer encountered a Grix raiding party. The hologram zoomed out, showing 5 larger ships surrounding the small human vessel. These ships were dark red and covered in spikes and weapons. They looked aggressive and mean, which was exactly what the Grix wanted. The Grix were one of the most feared pirate species in the galaxy, banned from Council space for their brutality and their habit of killing anyone who resisted them. The Grix had never seen humans before, Kelvith continued. To them, this was just another weak species to rob and terrorize. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Kevin watched the hologram with interest, even though he knew this story by heart. Every human child learned about the Wanderer in school. It was the moment when the galaxy first realized that humans were not like other species. The holographic scene shifted to show the interior of the human ship. The cargo bay was large and filled with containers and equipment. 12 humans stood in the center of the bay, their hands visible and empty of weapons. They wore simple merchant clothing, not military uniforms. They looked like ordinary people, traders trying to make a living moving goods between colonies. 4 Grix soldiers stormed through the airlock door. Each one was massive, easily twice the size of the humans, with thick armor plates covering their bodies and huge plasma rifles in their clawed hands. Their faces were all teeth and small, mean eyes. They moved with the confidence of predators who had done this many times before and never lost. The Grix commander stepped forward, its plasma rifle pointed at the humans. Through its translator, it demanded their immediate surrender and all their cargo. The humans stood very still, not moving, not speaking. They seemed to be exactly what the Grix expected. Frightened prey, frozen with fear, knowing they were about to lose everything they owned. Then one human stepped forward from the group. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and a weathered face that showed years of space travel. His name was John Brenner, and he was the captain of the Wanderer. He was unarmed, his hands at his sides, and he looked directly at the Grix commander without showing any sign of fear. And then Captain Brenner smiled. The hologram froze on his face, and Kevin heard several students gasp or make sounds of distress in their own languages. Even knowing what was coming, even being human himself, Kevin had to admit that Brenner's smile was disturbing. It was wide, showing all of his teeth. His eyes were not warm or friendly. Instead, they were cold and calculating, looking at the Grix the way a scientist might look at an interesting insect. Professor Kelvith let the image hang in the air for a long moment. The Grix battle recording showed that the commander hesitated here. It had raided hundreds of ships, seen dozens of species surrender. It understood fear and panic and desperation, but this expression on the human's face, it had no reference for what this meant. The hologram unfroze and began to play again. Captain Brenner spoke, his voice calm and almost friendly. "I hoped you would come," he said in perfect standard Galactic. The translation device clipped to his shirt picked up his English words and turned them into something the Grix could understand. "We have been waiting for you." The Grix commander took a step backward. In its species, backing away was a sign of confusion and uncertainty. Something was wrong, but it could not figure out what. What happened next, Professor Kelvith said, changed how the galaxy views humanity forever. The cargo containers behind the humans suddenly burst open. But instead of trade goods, they contained weapons. Human weapons. Improvised guns, explosive devices, and something the Grix had never seen before. An electromagnetic pulse generator that humans had jury-rigged from their ship's power core. The pulse went off first. The Grix armor and weapons all ran on electronic systems, and the pulse fried every circuit instantly. Their plasma rifles went dead in their hands. Their armor locked up, making it hard for them to move. They were suddenly vulnerable in a way they had not been seconds before, and the humans attacked. But what shocked the galaxy when this recording was recovered later was not the attack itself. Species fought back against pirates all the time. What shocked everyone was that the humans fought while smiling. Kevin watched as the hologram showed the battle. Captain Brenner moved with the speed and efficiency of someone who had trained for combat, even though he was supposed to be a merchant. His smile never faltered, not when he dodged a Grix claw, not when he fired his improvised weapon into the gap in a Grix's armor, not when he was knocked to the ground and rolled away from a massive foot that tried to crush him. The other humans were the same. A woman with red hair smiled as she threw an explosive device with perfect accuracy. A young man grinned while he slid under a Grix and stabbed upward with a plasma blade. An older woman actually laughed, as she climbed onto a Grix's back and attacked its unarmored neck joint. 3 humans died in this fight, Professor Kelvith said quietly, his scales turning almost black with sadness. Alan Rodriguez, age 34, Marcus Webb, age 28, and Samuel Okonkwo, age 41. They were merchants and traders, not soldiers, but they fought like trained warriors. The hologram showed the end of the battle. All 4 Gricks in the cargo bay were down, dead or dying. The humans were injured, bleeding, exhausted. Captain Brenner stood in the center of the carnage, his clothes torn and soaked with blood from a wound on his arm, and he was still smiling. The Grick ship had 8 more soldiers on board, Kelvith continued. Captain Brenner and his crew fought their way through the connecting airlock and onto the Grick's vessel. The battle recordings show the same thing over and over again. Humans fighting, humans injured, humans in mortal danger, and humans smiling through all of it. The hologram showed brief flashes of the fighting on the Grick ship, narrow corridors filled with plasma fire and explosions, humans using tactics that seemed impossible, like deliberately drawing fire to let their teammates move into position, or charging directly at armed enemies to close into melee range, where the Gricks could not use their guns without hitting each other. When it was over, Professor Kelvith said, all 12 Gricks were dead or captured. 9 of the 12 humans survived, though all of them were injured. The Wanderer was able to limp to a nearby station where they made contact with a Council patrol ship. The hologram changed to show a different scene. It was clearly a medical bay with equipment and monitors visible in the background. Captain Brenner sat on an examination table while a doctor worked on his injured arm. A Council investigator, a tall, thin Arcanian with purple skin, stood nearby with a recording device. Captain Brenner, the investigator said in a formal tone, you have been through a terrible ordeal. We are very sorry that your first contact with the Galactic Council was so violent. We want you to know that the Gricks are criminals, not representatives of our civilization. Brenner looked at the investigator and smiled. It was a different smile this time, smaller and warmer, but it still showed his teeth. No need to apologize, he said calmly. We chose to fight. We had a battle plan ready before they boarded. Everything went exactly as we hoped it would. The investigator's purple skin went pale, which in his species indicated shock. You planned this? You wanted them to attack you? We have been getting reports of Gricks raids in this sector for months, Brenner explained, still smiling. We modified our cargo bay into a trap and broadcast signals that made us look like an easy target. When they came, we were ready. Professor Kelvith paused the hologram. Do you understand what this means? Captain Brenner and his crew deliberately made themselves bait. They risked their lives and 3 of them died to stop pirates from attacking others. And Captain Brenner smiled when he explained this as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The lecture hall was absolutely silent. Students sat frozen in their seats trying to process what they had just seen and heard. This recording reached the Galactic Council within days, Kelvith said, and it changed everything. Humanity went from being an unknown species to being the subject of intense study and considerable fear. Because if this was how humans acted during first contact, what else were they capable of? The professor's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a thoughtful purple. The council sent xenopsychologists to study the survivors. They wanted to know if this was normal human behavior, or if Captain Brenner's crew was unusual in some way. What they found was both reassuring and terrifying. The hologram showed a series of interviews with the surviving humans from the Wanderer. Professor Kelvith allowed a brief pause in his lecture, giving the students time to process what they had seen. He noticed several of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats, their various appendages twitching with nervous energy. The human student Kevin sat very still with his face carefully neutral, and Kelvith felt a pang of sympathy for him. This lecture was never easy for the humans who attended it. After a moment, Kelvith touched his control panel again, and a new series of holographic images appeared in the air. The story of the Wanderer spread quickly through the Galactic Council, he said. Many species hoped it was an isolated incident, perhaps a group of unusually aggressive humans. But as contact with humanity expanded, we discovered that this behavior was not unusual at all. It was, in fact, remarkably common. The first image showed a human woman in military armor. She had dark skin and short black hair, and her face bore several scars from old wounds. Her name appeared in floating text beside her image. Sergeant Lisa Chen, Human Defense Forces. Sergeant Chen served during the Frontier Wars, when the Council was fighting against the Krix invasion, Kelvith explained. The Krix are, as many of you know, one of the most aggressive warrior species in our region of space. They respect strength and view retreat as a sign of ultimate weakness. They had never lost a ground engagement before facing humans. The hologram changed to show a battlefield. It was a barren planet with red sand and black rocks, the sky a dark purple. Two armies faced each other across a canyon. Krix warriors in their heavy battle armor on one side, human soldiers in lighter gear on the other. Sergeant Chen's unit was outnumbered and outgunned, Kelvith continued. Standard military doctrine would suggest a tactical retreat to a better defensive position. But Sergeant Chen had other ideas. The holographic footage showed what happened next. Instead of retreating, Chen walked forward into the open ground between the two armies. She was completely exposed with no cover, no backup, just her rifle and her armor. And as she walked, she looked directly at the Krix lines and smiled. Not a polite smile or a nervous smile, but a wide, predatory smile that showed all her teeth. The Krix commander, visible in the recording from a different angle, seemed confused by this. Through the translation of captured communications, Kelvith played the Krix commander's words. What is this creature doing? Is it defective? Why is it showing pleasure signs before death? Sergeant Chen raised her rifle and fired a single shot that hit the ground in front of the Krix lines. Then she spoke, her voice amplified by her suit's speakers so both sides could hear. I am Sergeant Lisa Chen of Earth. I challenge your best warrior to single combat. Or are the mighty Krix afraid of one human? The Krix value honor and personal combat above all else, Kelvith explained. They could not refuse such a challenge without losing face. Their champion stepped forward, a massive warrior standing 3 meters tall and carrying weapons that could punch through armor plating. The hologram showed the fight. It was brutal and quick. Sergeant Chen moved like water, always moving, never standing still. The Krix champion was stronger and had longer reach, but Chen was faster and more adaptable. She used the terrain, the angle of the sun, even the dust kicked up by their movements. And through it all, she kept smiling. When the fight ended, the Krix champion was dead and Sergeant Chen was still standing, though her armor was cracked and she was bleeding from several wounds. The hologram captured the moment when she looked back at the Krix army, and her smile grew even wider. Then she raised her rifle and fired into their ranks, and her entire unit charged forward behind her. The human forces won that battle, Kelvith said quietly. The Krix later told our investigators that they refused to engage Sergeant Chen's unit in close combat after that day. They believed she was a berserker, a warrior under the influence of combat drugs that removed all fear and pain. But medical tests proved she was completely unmodified. She was just being herself. Several students made sounds of distress. A Velthian near the front, a species that looked like a floating jellyfish, asked in a trembling voice, Professor, how is this possible? How can a being feel pleasure while in mortal danger? Kelvith's scales turned a thoughtful green. That is the question that has occupied xenopsychologists for 5 decades. But let me show you more examples, because Sergeant Chen's case is far from unique. The hologram changed again, now showing a different human in a very different environment. This was a medical tent, visible from the flapping canvas walls and the portable equipment. Wounded soldiers lay on tables while medical personnel moved between them with practiced efficiency. Explosions could be heard in the distance, and occasionally the whole tent shook from the impact of artillery fire nearby. In the center of this chaos stood Dr. Andrew Phillips, a human surgeon with gray hair and calm eyes. His hands moved with steady precision as he worked on a wounded soldier, cutting away damaged tissue and applying synthetic skin grafts. And on his face was a gentle, almost peaceful smile. Dr. Phillips served in 3 different war zones over a period of 10 years, Kelvith said. He was known throughout the medical corps for his ability to remain calm under pressure. But what disturbed his alien colleagues was not his calmness. It was his smile. The hologram showed an interview with a Centaurian nurse who had worked alongside Dr. Phillips. The Centaurian's translator conveyed his confusion and slight fear as he spoke. I have worked with many species, many doctors, but never one like the human. He would smile while operating, smile while telling someone their wounds were severe, smile while bombs fell around us. At first I thought he did not understand the danger. Then I realized he understood perfectly. He just did not care. That is not quite accurate, Kelvith said. Dr. Phillips cared very much about his patients and the danger they were all in. But he had learned something that many humans seem to know instinctively, that showing fear or stress only makes others more afraid. So he smiled to keep his patients calm, to keep his staff focused, to create an island of peace in the middle of war. The hologram shifted to show another interview, this time with Dr. Phillips himself. He sat in a clean medical facility clearly after the war had ended, wearing civilian clothes. The interviewer asked him about his smile, about how he could maintain such calm in terrible situations. Phillips smiled in the recording, a warm and genuine expression. "I was terrified most of the time," he admitted. "Every time a shell hit near us, every time we got a rush of critical patients, I was afraid. But my fear would not help anyone. So I smiled, I stayed calm, and I did my job. That's what humans do. We push through the fear and do what needs to be done. Do you see the pattern?" Kelvith asked the lecture hall. "Humans feel fear just like any other species. But they have developed the ability to override that fear, to function normally or even optimally while terrified. And they use the smile as a tool to hide their fear from others and perhaps even from themselves." The professor brought up another series of images, these showing a human woman in diplomatic robes standing before the Zorgon Trade Collective. The Zorgons were large, aggressive beings that controlled several profitable trade routes and were known for using intimidation and threats to get favorable deals. Ambassador Nicole Grant was sent to negotiate with the Zorgons about opening human trade routes through their space, Kelvith explained. The Zorgons expected an easy negotiation. Humans were new to the galactic stage, and the Zorgons thought they could bully them into accepting terrible terms. The holographic footage showed the negotiation. The Zorgon delegates were huge, deliberately sitting on raised platforms to tower over the human ambassador. They spoke in loud, aggressive tones, their translators conveying threats and demands. They wanted 90% of all profits from human ships passing through their space, along with access to human military technology and the right to board and inspect any human vessel without cause. Ambassador Grant sat calmly at the negotiation table, her hands folded in front of her. And she was smiling. Not a nervous smile, not a placating smile, but a pleasant, almost amused smile. "No," she said simply to each demand. "No, that will not work for us. No, we cannot agree to those terms. No, I am afraid that is impossible." The Zorgon chief delegate grew more aggressive, standing up and slamming his massive fists on the table. He demanded to know what gave humans the right to refuse, threatened to close all routes to human traffic, suggested that human ships might face unfortunate accidents if they did not cooperate. Ambassador Grant's smile never wavered. "That would be most unfortunate," she said in the same calm, pleasant voice. "Of course, if human ships face accidents in your space, we would have no choice but to escort our merchant vessels with military ships. And then we would need to investigate each accident thoroughly. Our investigation teams are very thorough. They might need to examine your facilities, question your personnel, access your records. It could take months for each investigation." The threat was clear to anyone listening. The Zorgons could make trouble for human ships, but humans could make even more trouble for the Zorgons. And Ambassador Grant delivered this counter-threat while smiling pleasantly, as if she were discussing the weather or suggesting what to have for lunch. The negotiations lasted 3 days. Professor Kelvith dimmed the lights further and brought up a new holographic display. This one showed biological charts and psychological graphs, data that had been collected from thousands of interactions between humans and other species over the past 50 years. The colored lines and numbers floated in the air, painting a picture that was both fascinating and disturbing. Every sentient species in the Galactic Council evolved with certain survival instincts, Kelvith began, his scale shifting to a deep blue color that indicated serious thought. When we see a predator, our bodies react automatically. Our hearts beat faster, our muscles tense. Chemicals flood our systems to prepare us for either fighting or running away. This is universal. It exists in every known species because those who did not have these instincts did not survive long enough to pass on their genes. He gestured to the charts. When we see weapons, the same response happens. Teeth, claws, spines, venom sacs, whatever natural weapons a predator species has, we recognize them as danger. A creche showing its teeth triggers the same fear response in us that a human showing its teeth does. But there is a crucial difference. The hologram focused on 2 images side by side. On the left, a creche with its mouth open in a snarl, teeth visible and aggressive. On the right, a human with a wide smile, teeth equally visible. When the creche shows teeth, we know what it means, Kelvith explained. The meaning is clear and we can respond appropriately. We can retreat, defend ourselves, or submit if necessary. The communication is honest and direct. He pointed to the human image. But when a human shows teeth, we receive contradictory signals. The teeth say danger, but the rest of the human's body language, their relaxed posture, their friendly tone, their pleasant expression, all say safety. Our instincts cannot resolve this contradiction. We become confused, uncertain, and that uncertainty creates fear. A Morphean student, whose species communicated primarily through color changes in their crystalline bodies, flashed a question in bright yellow pulses. Kelvith's translator interpreted it. But Professor, uncertainty is not the same as fear. Why does this confusion specifically frighten other species? An excellent question, Kelvith replied. The answer lies in what happens when we cannot predict a predator's behavior. In nature, predictability equals safety. If we know that a certain predator hunts at night, we avoid that area at night. If we know that showing submission will cause a predator to leave us alone, we can submit. But if we cannot predict what the predator will do, we are helpless. And helplessness is terrifying. He brought up a video recording and Kevin recognized it immediately. His whole body tensed in his seat. It was footage from the Battle of Centauri 7, one of the most studied military engagements in recent galactic history. 3 years ago, Kelvith said, a human military unit was trapped on Centauri 7 during a conflict with hostile forces. Commander Daniel Foster and his squad of 16 soldiers were surrounded, outnumbered 5-1, running low on ammunition, and cut off from support. By every military calculation, they should have surrendered or been wiped out within an hour. The holographic display showed a tactical map of the battlefield. Red markers indicated enemy positions in a complete circle around a small cluster of blue markers, representing the human squad. The situation looked hopeless. Military command contacted Commander Foster and offered to negotiate a surrender. Kelvith continued. The enemy forces had agreed to take prisoners instead of killing the squad. It was the logical choice, the only choice that made sense. But Commander Foster's response changed everything. The hologram showed a video message. Commander Daniel Foster appeared, his face dirty and streaked with blood from a wound on his shoulder. His armor was cracked and scorched from plasma fire. Behind him, explosions lit up the sky. He looked exhausted, injured, and completely outmatched. And then he smiled. It was a wide, genuine smile that seemed completely out of place in the situation. Negative on that surrender, Command, Foster said, his voice cheerful despite the chaos around him. My squad and I have been discussing it, and we have decided to try something different. It is probably going to be stupid, but it will definitely be interesting. Foster out. The video ended and Kelvith let the silence stretch for a moment. What happened next has been analyzed by military strategists from 40 different species, and none of them can fully explain it. Commander Foster and his squad went on the offensive. Outnumbered, outgunned, and injured, they attacked the enemy positions. The holographic display showed the battle from multiple angles, footage captured by drones and satellites. The human soldiers moved with coordinated precision, using tactics that seemed reckless but proved devastatingly effective. They used explosives to create chaos, moved through the confusion while the enemy was disorganized, focused their fire on key targets, and pressed forward relentlessly. But what made the footage truly disturbing to non-human observers was that throughout the entire battle, the humans were smiling. Not grimacing with effort, not snarling with rage, but actually smiling. Some even laughed as they fought. The battle lasted 43 minutes, Kelvith said quietly. When it ended, all 16 human soldiers were still alive, though 14 were wounded. 85 enemy combatants were dead or captured. The enemy forces later testified that they believed the humans were a suicide unit, possibly under the influence of combat drugs or mind control, because no rational species attacks while showing signs of pleasure and enjoyment. He paused and looked around the lecture hall. Were they drugged? Several students nodded, clearly hoping for a simple explanation. No, Kelvith said flatly. Post-battle medical evaluations showed every human soldier was completely sober and mentally sound. Commander Foster stated in his official report that smiling helped keep his squad's morale high. He said that if they were going to die anyway, they might as well die fighting and make it count. And if they managed to win, well, that would be a good story to tell later. The professor's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a disturbed purple. Do you understand what this means? Commander Foster used smiling as a deliberate psychological weapon. He knew that seeing humans smile while fighting would confuse and frighten the enemy. He knew his own soldiers would fight harder if they saw their commander showing confidence instead of fear. He weaponized his own species' confusing social signals. A new video appeared in the holographic display. This one showed Commander Foster being interviewed 2 weeks after the battle. His wounds had been treated and he wore a clean uniform. The interviewer, a Canthian journalist with insect-like features, asked him directly about the smiling. Commander Foster, many beings across the galaxy have seen the footage of your battle. They want to know why you and your soldiers smiled while fighting. Were you truly happy? Were you not afraid? Foster looked directly at the camera and smiled again, though this time it was a smaller, more thoughtful smile. Of course we were afraid, he said honestly. Fear is natural when you are in danger. But fear is just a feeling, and feelings do not have to control your actions. We chose to smile because it reminded us that we were still alive, still fighting, still had a chance. And if our smile scared the enemy, well, that was just a bonus. You used your smile as a weapon, the journalist said, sounding disturbed. We used everything we had as a weapon, Foster replied, still smiling. Our training, our equipment, our teamwork, and yes, our psychology. In war, you use every advantage available. The enemy's confusion about our facial expressions was an advantage, so we used it. Kelvith stopped the video. This is the truth that makes humans so disturbing to the galactic community. They are not savage or mindless. They understand exactly how their behavior affects other species, and some of them, like Commander Foster, deliberately use that understanding to their advantage. The professor brought up another series of images, these showing human soldiers in various training exercises. The Human Defense Forces now includes courses on what they call psychological tactics. They teach soldiers to be aware of how their expressions and body language affect alien species. They teach them when to smile to create fear and when to keep their faces neutral to avoid causing panic among allies. He showed footage of a training session where a human instructor was teaching a class of young soldiers. When dealing with species that interpret smiles as threat displays, the instructor said, remember that your smile can be as effective as a weapon. Use it strategically. A smile at the right moment can make an enemy hesitate, doubt, or retreat without a shot being fired. Kelvith's scales turned a sad gray color. This is what we call weaponized psychology. Humans did not evolve this trait deliberately, but once they realized how it affected other species, some of them learned to use it as a tool. It is not cruel or malicious. It is simply practical. And that practicality is perhaps more frightening than if it were done out of malice. The professor pulled up data charts again. Psychological studies show that soldiers from other species who fight alongside humans often experience confusion and stress related to human facial expressions. They report not knowing how to interpret human emotions, not being sure if a human smile means friendship or hidden threat. This creates tension even among allies. Professor Kelvith turned off most of the holographic displays, leaving only a soft ambient light in the lecture hall. His scales had settled into a calm, thoughtful blue-green color. He could sense that his students were overwhelmed with information, perhaps even frightened by some of what they had learned. It was time to bring the lecture to its conclusion, to help them understand not just the fear, but also the hope that humanity represented. I have spent 30 years studying humanity. Kelvith began, his voice softer now, almost gentle. I have lived on Earth for extended periods. I have worked alongside human researchers, shared meals with human families, and called several humans my friends. I have seen them in times of peace and times of crisis, and I want you all to understand something very important. He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. Humans are individually and as a species remarkably kind. They are empathetic, generous, and surprisingly gentle for a predator species that evolved on one of the most dangerous planets we have ever cataloged. They rescue animals that cannot benefit them. They help strangers at personal cost. They cry at sad stories and celebrate the success of others. They are in many ways one of the most compassionate species in the Galactic Council. Several students looked surprised by this statement, given everything they had just heard about human combat behavior and psychological warfare. But, Kelvith continued, his voice becoming more serious, we must never forget what they are. We must never forget where they came from. Earth is a Class 12 hostile world. To put that in perspective, most Council species evolved on Class 4 or Class 5 worlds. The difference between a Class 5 world and a Class 12 world is the difference between a peaceful garden and an active war zone. He brought up a holographic image of Earth, the beautiful blue and green planet rotating slowly in the air. Earth has weather systems that can destroy entire cities in hours. Its oceans contain creatures that can swallow a human whole. Its land masses have predators that can kill with a single bite. Diseases that evolved alongside humans have killed billions of them throughout their history. Even the plants can be deadly. Many are poisonous or covered in thorns. The image zoomed in to show various Earth creatures: a great white shark, its mouth full of teeth; a lion, muscles rippling under golden fur; a grizzly bear standing on its hind legs to tower over a human figure shown for scale; a tiny mosquito with text noting that it had killed more humans than any other creature through disease transmission. Humans evolved in competition with all of these threats, Kelvith explained. They did not have thick armor like the Kresh. They did not have natural weapons like the Yantari. They were not the fastest or the strongest, but they had something more valuable than any physical advantage. They had endurance. They had persistence. They had the ability to keep going when any sensible species would give up and die. He showed a video that many in the audience had probably seen before, but never in this context. It was footage from Earth, showing what humans called persistence hunting. A small group of human hunters wearing minimal clothing and carrying only simple spears followed a large antelope across an endless plain under a burning sun. This is how early humans hunted, Kelvith said. They did not chase their prey quickly. They did not ambush it. They simply followed it. Hour after hour, mile after mile. The antelope would run and the humans would walk after it. The antelope would rest and the humans would catch up. The antelope would run again and the humans would keep following. This continued for 8 hours. The video showed the end of the hunt. The antelope was on the ground, unable to run anymore, too exhausted to even stand. The humans approached it calmly and ended its life quickly. The antelope died of exhaustion, Kelvith explained. It ran until its body gave out because stopping meant being caught. The humans simply walked the entire time at a steady pace, never stopping, never giving up. That is what humans are. They are the thing that does not stop. He could see understanding dawning on many of his students' faces, along with a healthy dose of fear. Now apply this same trait to everything else humans do. They smile in the face of danger because they have evolved to face danger that would kill any of us. They find joy in challenges because challenges are what made them the dominant species on their planet. They override their fear instincts because their ancestors who could not do that were eaten by something bigger and stronger. Kelvith brought up images of human history. Ancient humans hunting with stone tools. Medieval humans building castles and fighting wars. Modern humans reaching into space. Humans have been to war with each other for their entire recorded history. They have fought over territory, resources, beliefs, and sometimes for no good reason at all. They have developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and yet they have also created breathtaking art, advanced science, and philosophies of peace and compassion. They are walking contradictions, the professor said softly. They are capable of incredible violence and incredible kindness, sometimes from the same individual in the same day. They will risk their lives to save a stranger, then go home and smile while watching fictional stories about violence for entertainment. He pulled up one more video, and Kevin recognized it immediately. It was Amy Rodriguez, a young human marine who had become famous across the galaxy for her rescue mission. The video showed her being interviewed after she and her squad had volunteered for an extremely dangerous mission to rescue civilians from a collapsing station. The interviewer asked her the question that everyone wanted to know. Why did you volunteer for this mission? The odds of survival were estimated at less than 30%. You could have stayed safe and let someone else go. Amy looked directly at the camera. She was young, probably only 25 or so, with short brown hair and tired eyes. There was a bandage on her arm and bruises on her face from the mission. And she smiled. It was not a warrior's smile or a predator's smile, but a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Because nobody else could do it, Amy said simply, as if the answer was obvious. The civilians needed help and my squad had the training and equipment to reach them. So we went. That is what you do when people need help. You go even if it is dangerous because it is the right thing to do. But 5 members of your squad died during the rescue, the interviewer pressed. Was it worth it? Amy's smile faded for a moment and grief crossed her face. My friends died heroes, she said quietly. They knew the risks and they went anyway because 43 civilians are alive now who would have died. Every one of those rescued people has family who will see them again. Yes, we paid a terrible price. But those civilians did not deserve to die. Someone had to help them, and I'm glad it was us. Then the smile returned, sad but genuine. I miss my friends every day. But I know they would do it all over again if they had the choice. That is what humans do. We run toward danger when we should run away. We fight when we should surrender. And we smile while doing it, because finding joy even in terrible circumstances is what keeps us going. Kelvith stopped the video and looked around the lecture hall. That is why every species fears a smiling human. Not because humans are evil or malicious or cruel, but because behind that smile is a species that will walk into hell itself if they believe it is the right thing to do. A species that can experience grief and joy simultaneously. A species that finds satisfaction in overcoming impossible odds, and they will smile the entire way. The lecture hall was completely silent. Even the normal background sounds of students shifting in their seats had stopped. Everyone was processing what they had learned, trying to reconcile their fear with understanding. So I returned to the question asked earlier. Kelvith said, "Should you be afraid of humans?" He paused, considering his answer carefully. Afraid? No, not if you are their friend or their ally. Humans are fiercely loyal and protective of those they care about. If a human considers you a friend, they will face danger for you without hesitation. They will share their resources, defend your honor, and stand beside you when others will not. His scales shifted to a solemn blue. But wary? Yes, always maintain a healthy wariness. Because the worst thing you can possibly do is mistake a human's smile for weakness. A human smiling at you might be expressing genuine friendship. Or they might be politely warning you that you have crossed a line. Or they might be calculating how to defeat you if negotiations fail. Learning to tell the difference is essential for anyone who works with humans. Kelvith looked directly at Kevin, who had been sitting quietly throughout the entire lecture. Humanity has been part of the Galactic Council for 53 years. In that time, they have fought in 3 major conflicts, always on the side of the Council. Their casualty rates are the highest of any species because they volunteer for the most dangerous missions. They have saved countless lives, both human and alien, and when asked why they take such risks, they always give the same answer. He played one final clip, a compilation of different humans being asked the same question. Why do you volunteer for dangerous work? The answers varied in wording, but were all essentially the same. Because someone has to do it. Because it is the right thing. Because those people need help. Because I have the skills to make a difference. The compilation ended, and Kelvith turned off the holographic display completely. The lecture hall was lit now only by the soft overhead lights, bringing everyone's attention back to the professor himself. That is the truth about humanity, Kelvith said softly. They are terrifying because they are capable of incredible things, both good and terrible. They smile in the face of death because their entire evolutionary history has taught them that death is always a possibility. But that is no reason to stop living. They find joy in challenges because overcoming challenges is literally what made them who they are. He took a deep breath, his scales settling into a peaceful gold color. I want to thank you all for attending this lecture. I know it has been disturbing and perhaps frightening for some of you. But understanding is the first step to communication, and communication is the foundation of peace. Several students began to gather their belongings, assuming the lecture was over. But then Kevin stood up. Every eye in the room immediately fixed on him, and the students who had been preparing to leave froze in place. Kevin looked nervous, but he stood tall and looked directly at Professor Kelvith. And then deliberately he smiled. Not a small apologetic smile, but a genuine warm smile that showed his teeth. Several students in the front rows flinched. Zix's tentacles tightened reflexively around his data pad. Thank you, Professor, Kevin said, his voice clear and steady. That was the most accurate description of my species I have heard since arriving at this university. I appreciate your honesty, even though some of it was hard to hear. Kelvith's scales shifted to a warm gold color, and he inclined his head respectfully. You are very welcome, Kevin. And thank you for having the courage to sit through this lecture. I know it was not easy to hear your species discussed as if you were a specimen being studied. But your presence here helped my students understand that humans are people, not just fascinating psychological subjects. Kevin nodded and sat back down. Around him, students began to whisper, but the tone had changed. There was still caution, still wariness, but also a growing sense of respect. As the lecture hall began to empty, Zix turned to his roommate. His tentacles moved in patterns that Kevin had learned to read as concern. "My friend," Zix said quietly, using the translator built into his communication device. "I must ask you something, and please know I mean no offense." "Go ahead," Kevin said, gathering his notes. "Are you upset about what the professor said? About how other species fear your smile? About being studied like this?" Kevin thought about it for a moment, his face serious. "No," he said finally. He was right about most of it. Humans do act in ways that seem strange to other species. We do smile when we probably should not. We do find satisfaction in overcoming challenges that would seem impossible to others. I cannot be upset about someone accurately describing my species, even if that description is not always flattering. Does it bother you that we find human smiles frightening?" Zix asked, his tentacles curling with what Kevin recognized as embarrassment. Kevin smiled again, smaller this time, and tried to make it as warm and unthreatening as possible. "A little bit," he admitted. "But I understand why. You evolved on a world where showing teeth always meant aggression. I evolved on a world where showing teeth can mean 100 different things. We just need to learn to understand each other better. You will learn to read our smiles, and we will learn to remember that our faces do not mean the same things to you that they mean to us." They walked toward the exit together, joining the flow of students leaving the hall. Zix was quiet for a moment, his tentacles waving thoughtfully. Then he asked, "Kevin, may I ask you something personal? Something that has bothered me since the lecture?" "Sure," Kevin said. "When you stood up at the end and smiled at Professor Kelvith, I was very frightened. But you were just being friendly and respectful, yes?" Kevin nodded. "Just being friendly. Just showing respect for a teacher who did his job well." Zix's tentacles curled tighter, and his skin tone shifted to a nervous purple. "And if someone had been threatening the professor, what would your smile look like then?" Kevin stopped walking. He turned to look at his friend, and his expression was completely serious with no trace of a smile. "Zix," he said quietly, "I really hope you never have to find out the answer to that question. Because if you ever see that smile, it will mean something has gone very, very wrong." They stood there for a moment, human and alien, looking at each other. Then Zix's color shifted back to a calmer blue, and he reached out a tentacle to touch Kevin's shoulder. "I am glad you are my friend," Zix said simply. Kevin's expression softened and he smiled again, this time a small, genuine smile of friendship. "I am glad you are my friend too." They walked out of the lecture hall together, into the bright corridors of the Galactic University. Behind them, Professor Kelvith stood alone in the now empty hall, reviewing his notes and preparing for his next class. He thought about Kevin, about the young human's carefully controlled expressions and his genuine kindness toward his alien roommate. He thought about the smile Kevin had given him at the end of the lecture, warm and respectful. And he thought about the other smile, the one that flickered across Kevin's face for just a brief moment when he talked about protecting someone he cared about. That smile had been different, harder, more focused. It was the smile of someone who would do whatever was necessary to defend a friend. It was the smile of a species that had climbed to the top of the food chain on a death world by being more persistent, more adaptable, and more willing to do the impossible than anything else on their planet. Kelvith's scale shifted to a thoughtful purple. Yes, he had been absolutely correct in his lecture. Humanity was still the most fascinating, the most perplexing, and the most quietly terrifying species in the galaxy, and that was exactly why they made such excellent friends and such terrible enemies. The professor gathered his materials and left the lecture hall, already thinking about his next semester's curriculum. Perhaps he would explore why humans insisted on keeping dangerous predators as pets, feeding them and allowing them into their homes. That was another uniquely human trait that baffled the entire galaxy, but that lecture could wait for another day. For now, he was simply grateful that humanity had chosen to join the Galactic Council as friends, rather than conquerors, because if humans ever decided to become an enemy of the Council, Kelvith was not sure anyone in the galaxy would be able to stop them, not when they could smile their way through anything the universe threw at them.